The UN arms embargo on Iran ended on October the 18th, under the terms of Resolution 2231, which endorsed the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, or JCPOA. But like the US elections result, there's yet room to swear on it. Should President-elect Joe Biden take the reins uncontested, he will re-enter the JCPOA, and Iran will be able to buy and sell weaponry prohibited from 2010 without US interference. But is it that simple? Biden will re-enter the deal if Iran recommits to its nuclear deal commitments. Iran started reversibly stepping away from those commitments only after outgoing US President Trump trashed the deal. So recommitting shouldn't be a problem for this country once the US has taken the first step and rejoined the JCPOA club. Once that sequence is observed, the problem will be solved. The question is, will Biden put the horse before the cart so that Iran can benefit from the arms sanctions lifting without nuisance? I'm Leila Faroumarzi, bringing to you experts for predictions on Iran today. Make no mistake, the US tried to prevent the lifting of arms sanctions against Iran and had ready by mid-August a draft resolution for the Security Council to vote on, but it failed to win the vote. It just didn't acknowledge the loss, characteristically, and continues to threaten anyone wanting to get into arms deals with Iran. Legally, Iran is free to openly buy advanced weaponry and sell its defense equipment to anyone looking for quality at a reasonable price. But the question is, will America today look to the rule of international law after 4 years of deal-breaking? Mr. Mohammadi of the Khorasan paper implies the US has not much choice left.
حرف آمریکاست.
It's still limited to words, and the US has not put it into action yet. Nothing has happened to either prove or disprove it. No arms embargo shipped from or destined to Iran has been seized to conclude that the US or any other country has applied arms embargoes against Iran. We have yet to see such a thing, but the arms embargo has been lifted on paper. The Islamic Republic is entitled within the framework of international law and other UN resolutions to export arms or to import arms from any country it desires.
When the proposed resolution didn't work to keep arms sanctions in place, the US sought to trigger the snapback mechanism. This way, all sanctions, including arms sanctions, would just snap back into place. But again, that mechanism is a provision in Resolution 2231 of the JCPOA, and America is no member. It pulled out of the JCPOA in 2018. And the UN Security Council at large just wouldn't hear of reinstating arms sanctions on Iran. Mr. Afrahi is a political analyst with whom we've, like today, done several interviews at his home. The arms embargo against Iran has come to an end automatically by way of the JCPOA. Would you say that that will legally hold, or is the US right to assume it has triggered the snapback mechanism?
It was a big failure for the US. The Americans expected the European allies to stand with them. Now, 75 years after the end of World War II, for the first time the EU Troika adopted a position in total opposition to the US's and vindicated Iran. That has strengthened Iran's position in international forums. The US can continue to fabricate any obstacle it wants, but Iran will continue to exercise its rights.
Mr. Khoshchesh made the effort of coming to Press TV studios to give us his take on our topic of the week. Would you say that the lifting of the arms embargo will hold? Because it legally holds, will it really hold?
One of the problems with this JCPOA is that it's not respected by the Europeans and by the main parties that were to guarantee that Iran would receive its merits. So based on JCPOA and Resolution 2231, they need to guarantee that Iran would be provided with its merits and all the sanctions would be removed under the JCPOA, including the US, the EU, and other types of sanctions. So the UN resolution stands above all. So 2231 is more important than the EU rules and regulations.
In theory, Iran is now free to purchase anything from tanks to warplanes and naval vessels without the need for UN approval. Before this, it could purchase purely defensive weapons, including the Russian-made S-400 air defense system, if it desired and were left to its own devices.
There might be even better technologies which could help Tehran and which could change the balance strategically on the coasts of the Persian Gulf and in the sea. There might be ship-to-ship, anti-ship missiles which are mounted in warships. In this area, I believe Tehran would be willing to buy something. With regard to fighter jets, yes, I believe Tehran would like to renew its air fleet, which is very old.
Mr. Khanzadeh is commander of the Iranian Navy. He gives us a little update on naval assets.
Every
achievement in the Navy before the Islamic Revolution was totally dependent on mainly Western governments. Iran used to purchase equipment and vessels from them or receive their naval education. But in the aftermath of the Islamic Revolution, the Navy started its work by relying on religious teachings and revolutionary ideals. The Navy would have disappeared had it continued the same pre-revolution process. The Navy's stability following the Islamic Revolution is based on domestic capabilities.
Anyhow, Iran will not be going on a weapons shopping spree, as its foreign minister Zarif put it. It would rather procure a select advanced kit of smaller quantity but higher quality weaponry and weapon systems. Because its focus is on producing its major defense needs at home. This is both cost-effective with an inflation of over 40% and serve to counter sanctions of 40 years. For Iran to freely buy and sell weapons is not a chance just for Iran. According to Mr. Khoshcheshm, Iran expects JCPOA partners to both support this freedom and themselves deal in arms with Iran. This is because the JCPOA was to eventually boost Iran's foreign trade and economy. And should the European partners to the deal waver in showing commitment within months, Iran may do worse than mince its way away from the nuclear deal. So for events not to take such a drastic turn, do you see Iran getting to sell its domestically made armaments to its target market to the extent it expects?
That would require the foreign parties to the nuclear deal that have promised to do this arms trade with Tehran to do it in 2 or 3 months. If they don't do it, then the parliament would go for that bill, as it was stated a few days ago. They, confirmed and approved the single urgency of the bill. That means that that was an alarm, that if this arms trade would not happen in 2 or 3 months, then Tehran, the Iranian parliament would require the government to take action to drop all undertakings under the JCPOA.
All said, matters are not completely in the hands of the US alone.
How can Iran now sell its arms in light of threats from buyer nations? One option would be to smuggle arms. One option is to circumvent sanctions by selling arms to Russia, China, and other nations so that they would resell them to customers. Or we can share technological know-how. Just like civilian technology, we can share our military technology. Therefore, the US does not enjoy too much freedom of action.
Iran learned to stand on its own feet, beginning with its abandonment in the early days of the Republic and during the imposed war with Ba'athist Iraq. This country's 2019 defense expenditure was under $18.5 billion. Compare that to Saudi Arabia's $80 billion. Making military equipment at home means selling that equipment and military cooperation abroad to more than Iran's present 60 short customers. That would make for a pretty penny when the economy has been hit both by COVID-19 and US sanctions. That's right, when Donald Trump backed out of the nuclear deal which eased sanctions on this country, he reimposed economic nuclear-related UN sanctions as US sanctions. And even now, America and its allies in West Asia can't be happy to see Iran at the gates of the global arms market. The US's concern would be more than losing military ground to Iran in the region. It's also a matter of the big bucks.
As far as selling arms is concerned, one part of the story pertains to revenue that it generates for the country. The official arms market is valued at $500 billion. The unofficial market is much higher. They would never like us to have a share in this market. The second point is that we would supply arms to the countries that may not or cannot purchase arms from the US or Western nations. Apart from revenue making, Iran would upgrade some nations that may have to give concessions to the US because of military weaknesses.
Iran still faces the big problem, which is US arms sanctions against this country continue, and the US imagines those sanctions to be as good as UN sanctions. Now, should US resistance and interference prevail, what will it mean for Iran, which is looking mostly to face off Russia and China to buy from? In a tweet October the 19th, Dmitry Polyansky, Russian ambassador to the UN, said, "It is not up to the United States to tell us or others what they can or can't do."
The issue of the arms trade is deeply intertwined with politics. You can never set aside politics from arms selling. You may separate wheat or even oil and petrochemicals from politics, but arms is entirely intertwined with politics. Every country would sell or buy arms based on its national security policy. We have held talks with Russia and China and have signed agreements with them on their air weapons, defense weapons and tanks. We don't need special weapons to a great extent.
Talking of the 10-year UN arms embargo that found itself enclosed by a sunset clause of the JCPOA, United Nations Security Council Resolution 1929, which was passed on the 9th of June 2010, banned Iran from participating in any activities related to ballistic missiles, tightened the arms embargo, travel bans on individuals involved with the program, froze the funds and assets of the IRGC and Islamic Republic of Iran shipping lines, and recommended that states inspect Iranian cargo, prohibit the servicing of Iranian vessels involved in prohibited activities, prevent the provision of financial services used for sensitive nuclear activities, etc., etc. It's time to look at examples of weaponry Iran has and wants. But first, to look at what other media outlets have to say with Shahrzad.
Hi, my name is Shahrzad Manoucheri, and we'll be reviewing the latest update on the expiration of the UN arms embargo, Iran's approach, and opportunities. In an article by Critical Threats, we witness Iranian weapons exports will have lasting effects on regional dynamics. Iranian officials will try to make a net profit with exports by capitalizing on their expanding domestic defense industry. Iran invested in its defense industry after the arms embargo disrupted attempts to purchase vital defense systems since 2007. Iran started building the indigenous Bavar 373 air defense system in 2010 to rival the S-300 after Russia backtracked on a contract to sell Iran the system. Iranian media reports claim the Bavar 373 can detect 3 times more targets than the S-300 can. Iranian officials are likely preparing to sell weapons in Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan, and Mauritania. The leader of Iran's defense industry stated that Iran will sell its homegrown weapons to countries despised by the US, the day after the arms embargo was lifted. Iranian foreign ministry officials renewed diplomatic efforts in Yemen, Afghanistan, Syria, and Mauritania leading up to the expiration of the UN arms embargo. Arab News reports why it won't be easy to reset the Iran nuclear clock. On the political front, the Iranian administration has made it clear that it does not necessarily stand ready to re-enter the JCPOA, explaining that it negotiated with countries not changing US administrations. The economic effect of US sanctions may soften that stance, as may the devastation caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. As for the Europeans, they would welcome a revival of the JCPOA. The Middle East is the near neighbor of Europe, and as far as Brussels and other European capitals are concerned, the fewer tensions the better. If a new US administration chooses to re-engage on the JCPOA, it can count on support from the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Joseph Borrell, and foreign ministries in London, Paris, and Berlin. Whenever one stands on the merits of the JCPOA, or lack of them, rekindling the spirit of 2015 will be difficult, to say the least. The Financial Tribune claims engagement with Iran in EU's strategic interest. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell underlined the need to keep the 2015 nuclear deal in place since engagement with Iran remains in EU's vital strategic interest. Together with our European and international partners, we are working hard to make sure that diplomacy with Iran continues to be possible, he said in his address to the European Parliament's plenary debate on the situation in Iran. While expressing concern about Iran's reduced compliance, Borrell pointed out that the nuclear deal is also an economic deal. We cannot pretend to ask Iran to fulfill the nuclear obligations if at the same time they do not get any kind of reward from the economic side, he said. He also said Europe would refuse to maintain a UN arms embargo on Iran now that it has expired as part of its JCPOA commitments. We cannot say that we fight to keep the JCPOA alive and at the same time impose an arms embargo related to the JCPOA itself, he said. That's all for this segment. We'll see you next week.
Having come under siege from US sanctions, Iran perfected weapons capabilities that mesh with defense tactics of mostly asymmetric warfare. It produces ballistic missiles and drones to create a tactical and strategic, primarily deterrent response. Iran also has from tanks to artillery to mortars to anti-tank weapons and vehicles to submarines.
ما تو همین فضای گفتمانی که با شرکت‌های دانش بنیان انجام
In our talks with knowledge-based companies, a young engineer came and said he would repair the boat engines, which are very sophisticated. We gave him one sample and after 2 months he returned. Every time we sent this engine for repair, it was returned at 60% efficacy. But this time when we put it on the test bed, we saw its efficacy at 85%. He stood firm and asked us to raise it to 100. After that, we gave him 3 engines and this time he returned them in 1 month. 4 months later, he came and said he was ready to totally manufacture this engine for us. You see that over a 5-month period, a knowledge-based cell comprising uranium use did this job. I can't name them now, otherwise you would be surprised to see people of such young age have reached such capability. It was just an example.
You know, drones are the future, are the first sample and generation of future arms, because future wars would be fought with robots or semi-robots, and Iran has the access to that. One of them is the Sentinel 170 that Iran developed after it downed the American Sentinel. It did a reverse engineering, reproduced it, and upgraded it. The American type was good only for surveillance, but the Iranian type does both surveillance and combat missions.
Since the 1990s, Iran has reverse engineered and in some cases improved Soviet and North Korean ballistic missiles and US manufactured cruise missiles. It is also producing anti-tank guided missiles, mortars, radar systems, and so forth. In fact, this country claims to be a global power with radar and UAVs and has improved its air defense systems. It will, however, still need a variety of components from abroad, such as gyroscopes for drones.
The first objective in buying arms is deterrence, not defense or war. The adversary party should know that you are equipped with such a system so that it would never dare attack you. For as long as you don't have such equipment, enemies will always think about attacking or invasion. But when you have it, you're safe.
Iran's major weakness is air capability. Because it exhausted its Air Force fleet during the Iraq-Iran War of the 80s in a heroic counterattack that pushed Iraq back at the onset of the war. To replenish that, Iran may find a number of the world's most proficient aircraft could be available for sale. They may be not as advanced as US or European fighter planes, but the Russian Sukhoi Su-30 flanker combat jet, along with China's J-10 Firebird and the joint China-Pakistan JF-17 Thunder multi-role jets, are available for export. Lacking as Iran's Air Force might be, as Aero Society put it, as quaint as those Tomcats may look, with motivated pilots and good GCI, they might just prove to have unexpectedly sharp teeth against an adversary with a risk-adverse approach to an aerial conflict. And Iranian pilots proved to be pretty motivated during the contemporary war of the 1980s. The US may be the world's #1 arms exporter, but as soon as a missile is suspected to be made in Iran, the unrivaled America will brand it as aid to terrorists. The US does know a thing or two about terrorists. To name some good customers, Iraq signed a $200 million arms deal with Iran in 2014. Syria and Venezuela may be able to ignore Washington's threats to all those dealing with Iran, but they will have difficulty paying for Iranian-produced weapons. Iran may also increase its munition, mortar and light arms exports to Africa in making the most of the lifting of the arms embargo. Iranian military equipment suitable for regional allies and other customers include electro-optical and laser-guided missile systems such as the Sadid. This appears to be based on the Israeli Spike. Then there's Tondar, Qaem, Dehlavieh and Tufan 5. That's a copy of the American TOW-2A. These missiles can be difficult to counter if used effectively. Iran has also begun manufacturing its own version of the versatile RPG-29 rocket-propelled grenade, named Qadir.
During the war with Saddam Hussein, Iran was not able even to produce one single bullet. Even barbed wire cargoes to Tehran were confiscated by the Ukrainians, by the Russians. They never allowed Iran to receive any kind of aid. So Tehran was pushed to develop an arms program. Now Tehran is self-sufficient. It is, manufacturing different types of weapon systems, very advanced ones. When the Russians decided to go along with the terms of the deal over the S-300 anti-missile defense system, Tehran developed its own. And at the end of the day, they developed Bavar 373, which the Russians say is an upgraded version of S-300. It's called S-376E, which is a system between, an air defense system between S-300 and S-400.
The US remains unhappy at the prospect of a stronger Iran. That unhappiness, however, may work well for Iran if it translates into a change of stance towards this country. That is to say, if it keeps America and Israel away from Iranian sites. The two are banking on the weakness of Iran's fighters, but they may yet be surprised.
Our defense equipment, as much as they are upgraded and diversified, will benefit us. They can deter any limited airstrikes. Today, we have very effective defense equipment. Every country should upgrade its defense prowess and diversify and upgrade its arms.
The main purpose of US sanctions is to make Iran defenseless by air, land and sea for possible future attacks, and to weaken Iran to the point where it can take no offensive action. But a win-win situation is based on mutual relative respect for each party's interests. So perhaps with the Vice President of JCPOA President Obama now at the helm, the US will ease its ambitions in favor of diplomatic talks it has long sought with Iran. That's it for today. Thanks for watching from the whole team. Don't forget to watch at the same times next week and each week after, as you never know what's on, and to leave your comments and topic requests. Bye for now.